So you can see here at Article 1, Section 8, then to make the long and short of it is that the Congress has the power to coin money. That's what we hired them for, because under the Articles of Confederation in the 1783 to 1787 period, you had all the states coining money, and what's worse, they were issuing bills of credit, that is, Federal Reserve notes of their own. So there was paper currency from Rhode Island and New York and Pennsylvania, etc. I think the only state that didn't do that was Virginia, God bless them. They stuck with gold and silver coin. And all the rest of them had circulating bills. And the inflation just culminated around the time that the Constitution was written up, and George Washington said in 1790 that there's chaos. And that's why the Coinage Act of 1792 is so important to us today, because they forever outlawed paper money in the United States. And let's turn over to Article 1, Section 10, which is this famous section that you're going to learn about here on this Miracle on Main Street. Now, I've talked to some very knowledgeable patriots who are running schools themselves and who have been into the courtroom. I want to caution you, okay? And I've talked to judges on this subject. This Miracle on Main Street is not a book to take into the courtroom. And I'm going to show you why here in just a moment. You use Miracle on Main Street to educate your 15-year-old kid. I think every American needs to find out what has happened to him. And this man that wrote this book just did a whale of a good job in telling us about gold and silver and the intent of the Congress and the intent of our founding fathers and the Constitution. But it's not a legal treatise. We have a legal treatise on money written by a professor at George Washington University, and I'm going to introduce you to this. This is not a part of the course. This is going to come in when we put together the IRS Act. I'm going to show you, and we're going to put I don't know if it'll be 2 or 3 tapes together, but we're going to show you how to use money and to drop out of the IRS and to drop out of the whole taxing system. But while I'm on this subject, you want to be very cautious that you're not a tax evader, because most of you, I fear, are tax evaders rather than tax avoiders. And we always tell people to obey the laws. Now, we might be entrapped into some bad laws, but if we are and we've made contractual agreements, we have to honor those. But there's no reason why you can't get out of those bad contracts. Looking over here at Article 1, Section 10, no state shall enter into any treaty, alliance, or confederation, grant letters of marque or reprisal. That's a key one. Grant letters of marque or reprisals. Coin money, emit bills of credit. Here's your circulating bills. No state shall issue circulating bills. Federal Reserve notes. Make anything but gold or silver coin a tender in payment of debts. And boy, there's 17 words that have a real history behind them that Miracle on Main Street will really lay out for you. And I think this book is available for $3 or $4. We have hundreds of copies here, and we pass these out all the time. We're going to put one of them in with this lesson here, but if any of you want this, you can buy it locally. You can probably get it from the author. I don't know what the price is. They're not very much. And you'll notice that the states are forbidden then to make anything but gold or silver coin a tender in payment of debts. Now, key words that come along here are debts, tender, lawful money, discharge, pay. Those are terms and words that we all think are kind of basically synonymous. Hey, I'm going to go down to the drugstore and I'm going to pay the druggist. Hey, I'm going down and I'm going to buy some gas. How am I going to pay for it? I'm going to pay for it with lawful money of the United States. Yeah, this is the kind of lawful money I'm using, and this is legal tender for all debts, public and private. And when we went to the government schools, we think Federal Reserve notes are lawful money of the United States, and we think that it's tender, and, we just lump all these words together, because out on the street, when you're having a conversation in the barber shop, that's the way you describe your transactions. You write checks, and you treat checks just like you would money, and you treat coins just like money, and you treat Federal Reserve notes just like money, but they're really not. Anything can serve as money, I'll grant you that. But you see, our Constitution identifies what is and what is not money. And in the state of Idaho, at Article, it's Statute 2822-101, that it's the dollar. When we get into money, we find out that a dollar is 371.25 grains of silver. See, a dollar isn't a piece of paper. The dollar is redeemable in lawful money. You take the dollar to the bank and he gives you lawful money. And when you go into the courtroom, you see you're going to pay your debt. That is, you're going to pay the judgment. You're going to pay the fine. Well, how are you going to pay it? You're going to pay it in lawful money of the United States. The dollar, the cent, or the mill. There isn't a court in the land that can issue a judgment. Now, they're doing it all the time, and if you don't pay the judgment, they'll run out and put a lien on your house, but then you don't own the house anyway. In fact, when we get into Admiralty, I'm going to show you what's happened. We actually lost World War I. That's where it began. We thought we won World War I and II. The truth is we lost World War I, and I don't know yet what happened in World War II. I think we lost a little worse there. And now, in order to pay the war debts, what we've done is we've pledged all the land in America. The Federal Reserve System owns almost all the land in America, except for about 13 pieces, the last I heard. There's 13 pieces of allodial land in this country. Now, I think what could be done, based upon our common law and based upon our Constitution, is to just repudiate all the debt in the land. Throw the bankers out, like the Virginians threw all the lawyers out in 1685, and turn that land back over to its original owners. Now, I want to show you something that's extremely important. I'm going to show you that the land is so crucial, and was so crucial in ancient times, that there was a thing called a landmark set up. And I have to pause right here now. I got to show you this thing called landmark. It's in Deuteronomy 19. I don't mean to preach a sermon here, but this thing of Scripture pretty well ties in with our common law. You got to remember this now. If it's offensive and you're an atheist of some kind, and you don't believe in the Bible and you don't like it, I'm not, trying to talk down to you here. What I want you to understand is, whether God exists and all this religion and all this hocus pocus and the Bible and all this is true or false, good or bad, right or wrong, isn't the subject matter. What you have to understand is that the guys that wrote this Constitution, which is the supreme law of the land, were kind of religious guys. They formulated and patterned this Constitution, which is the common law, after the Scriptures. These people were religious and they burned witches. So they killed witches. They'd catch a murderer and they'd kill him. They used to execute murderers. And today we don't do that. We don't execute murderers today. Now there's a reason for doing that. See, those murderers are the property of the state, and they're valuable property of the state, and the state is not going to destroy something that has a value to it. I mean, you know yourself, when you go outside and you've got a rose bush out there, it's got thorns on it and it sticks you all the time, but you don't tear the rose bush out or throw it. It's valuable. It makes your property worth more money because it's landscape. Okay? But it's property and you own it, even though it's maybe a detriment to you. Now, I think this was in Deuteronomy 19:14. Let me see if I'm right here. I'm not much of a Bible scholar. It's, let me start over here like this. I've got an index. It's 19:14, all right. So here we are at Deuteronomy 19. Come on, 14 and 12. Yeah, here it is. It says, "You shall not remove your neighbor's landmark, which they of old time have set in your inheritance, which you shall inherit in the land that the Lord your God gives you to possess it." Landmarks. Those of old times, that is, your fathers set out landmarks, and they staked out land and they owned it, and it was theirs, and it was free and clear, and it was in allodium. And you notice here it says your inheritance. Look up that word inheritance, and you'll find out inheritance is a bloodline. You see, my son can inherit my wealth or my property. You can't inherit property in the United States. It's absolutely impossible. If you've got property, it's on the tax rolls, and if it's on the tax rolls, it goes back to old English common law here, that your property recorded on the rolls is the king's property. And it's on the rolls. And the word rolls from the English means that it's the king's property and you have an equitable interest in it. And that's what happens to all mortgages. You see, the county has a roll of the land, and your Department of Motor Vehicles has a record of title of all the people that own the titles to the cars. The person who has the title is the owner of the car. The guy that issues the title has an equitable interest in it. So you go to the state and you get title to your land. You go to the motor vehicle department and you get title to your car. Okay? You give up your allodial right in the property and grant that to the state, and you take back from the state the privilege to use the car. And then, of course, when you die, they require an inheritance tax. And that comes from feudalism. You see, the lord over the land, if you were a good serf, you'd want to leave your property to your son. You'd go to the master, the lord, and you'd say, what do I have to pay you to give my inheritance to my wife and my children? You'd say, well, give me 50 pounds, and I'll hold you free and clear. There was his inheritance tax. Because the land belongs to the landlord, you see. And we are not the landlords over our own land in this country. There's a few of you out there that may own your land free and clear, but it's still on the tax rolls, and until it's taken off the tax rolls, it belongs to the Lord. But I want to bring your attention to this, because this is very important, because there's another doctrine here in Scripture that talks about a Jubilee year. And here's the way this thing works. In ancient times with the Israelites, remember, they came down off this mountain now, and they've got God as their king. There's no king. Read the book of Judges, and you'll find out a unique historical and a very, it's a documented piece of history. It's so unique, there's nothing like it. There was no king in Israel in those days. They went over the river, and they had a system of judges. They didn't have their first king until this guy Saul came along. Samuel was the last judge. And they had this Jubilee year, and they had this year of release. And so every 7 years, you'd be in debt to somebody. They'd have to release you in this year of release. And then every 50th year, if your land was mortgaged or in some way had been taken away, let's say my name's Gordon, we got 160 acres out here, I didn't want it for some reason, and it's 13, or let's just say it's 13 years to the Jubilee year, and that came every 50th year. All of a sudden, my land has 13 years of value, and so I sell it to you, and you use it for 13 years. You couldn't own that land. That land had to go back to the Gordons. Had to go back to my son if I died. Had to come back to me. I could only mortgage that land for 49 years. And the 50th year it had to be turned back. You see that connecting link with gold, precious metals? Let's call it gold and silver, the land and labor. All right? There's your connecting link again. When we came over here to this country, we were attempting to get away from repression. Well, the repression that we're always trying to get away from is the old Roman civil law. You just follow that on back, and I'll bet you that Nimrod himself was instituting this Babylonian mystery religion, and I'll bet you that the Roman civil law, or what at that time would be called the Babylonian civil law, I don't see any difference in it throughout history. I think what we've got is civil law, and we've always had it. These people were religious that came over to this country, and they were following some of these precepts of the Bible. Not entirely. They didn't, my observation of religious people is that if God said do this, they won't. And if God says don't do this, they will. That's my observation. But there's a lot of things out of the Scripture here that's been incorporated in our state constitution. And you can sure find it in Massachusetts. Boy, I'll tell you, those guys in the old days, they just had the Bible right in their law. And they just took it right out of here. And so these people, 200 years ago, when they had a piece of land, 40 acres of land, that was theirs. They knew they owned it. No one could throw them off that land. They didn't pay property tax on it because you can't tax a free man. That's where this money thing comes in, you see, because the free man who's working on his land, he grows potatoes or he grows something on it. He trades his substance to his neighbor or somebody else or a trader. He gets gold and silver, which is portable land. This gold and silver is portable land. You can come up to Idaho from California. You sell your land in California. You take the gold and silver from the land. You come up here and you buy land. Now you've transported your property, real property in California, and you've brought it up to Idaho. There's something for something. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. That's common law, because if you gouged a guy's eye out, as I understand it, didn't mean that you went over here and you gouged the other guy's eye out. I know that doesn't make any sense. Two people running around with one eye doesn't benefit anybody, even if it was intentional. What they did is they made the guy pay reparations. And so there's some statutes and laws here in the Bible that talk about, if your ox gored somebody or caused a property damage, there were remedies in here to get damages back, whether you paid it in gold or silver or another ox, or in some cases there was some capital punishments involved. But what you see here in Scripture is the same common law that Blackstone wrote about back in the 17th century. Now, I challenge you to read the Blackstone commentaries. You can probably pick those up in your law library and read what these people were thinking back in the 17th century. Now what you get in the schools today is the Roman civil law. So you're born, and you go to school. It's like I did. I was born in 1939, and 1945 I started school, and they taught me how to read and write and do these little functions and things. When I was 37 years old, I couldn't count money. I had to have an accountant. I didn't understand virtually anything about Bible or anything about the common law. I never read Blackstone's commentaries. All I knew is that the legislature makes laws and we have to obey those laws. But that isn't the way it was in 1787 or 1790. Who cared what the legislature was passing in the way of laws because it didn't affect the freemen? But somewhere around 1890 to 1900 it started to affect the freemen because, you see, we were giving up our gold and silver. And that Federal Reserve Act is just kind of the Achilles heel or the coup de grace, I guess you'd call that. Because now they're issuing money, and to get the camel's nose into the tent, as the old saying goes, they first of all pass the Federal Reserve Act, and they say, well, now the bill is redeemable in gold and silver. Oh, there's no difference between the two. Okay, then in 1933 they take the gold out, and they say, well, it's still redeemable in silver, isn't it? Then they take the silver certificates, and they take all the backing away from it except the $1 bill until 1964, and then in 1964 they take that away from you. And by that time, between 1913 and 1968, you've got a couple, 3 generations in there, don't you? And so the later generations now are totally divorced from the former. Now, let me show you historical precedent. Do you remember a story, some of you older people may remember this, that the Germans sunk the Lusitania in 1915 or 16, I guess in 1917 they sunk the Lusitania, about 20, 30 miles off the Irish coast. And you probably heard that those dirty Huns over there in Germany sunk that and killed all those Americans because they were bad, wicked, terrible, and awful, and that they were just killing civilians. That's what I heard. That's what my grandfather taught and told me when I was a youngster, about 10, 11 years old. Now, 50 years after that, this is 1967, the government released the report. You see this confidential, top-secret report? That ship was carrying guns and ammunition, and the Germans knew that. And so they took out 5 ads in the New York Times, the Chicago Tribune, the Los Angeles Times, and a couple other newspapers, and they said if that ship sails from New York, and if it carries those munitions over there, if we catch it, we're going to sink it, because it's not neutral. Now, the munitions are unique because they were being used in British guns, and the British guns had a different size on it. And guess where they were making that ammunition? They were making it in Indiana. A special size for English guns. So we were actually backing the English, several years before 1917. Now, here's the reason I'm pointing that out to you. Our government lies to us. My grandfather died in 1951, and the report, the confession from the government didn't come out till 1967. So he believed that lie between 1917 and 1951. My grandmother died in 1970, and that report came out in 67, and she wouldn't believe it. She wouldn't believe that the government would lie to her between 1917 and 1967. She finally knew the truth, but she was 87 when she died. You see, 3 years before she died, she found out the government lied to her. So what happens is the government then is in total control in America, in the same way it is in the Soviet Union or anyplace else. We just have a more benevolent police state here than they have over there. I know it's a police state because they arrest me for political reasons and put me in jail all the time. I suspect one of these days they'll kill me and then tell you they're doing God a service to do that because I'm some kind of a traitor. I'll probably be laid away for treason or something like that. Anybody who runs out here and starts talking about the government and telling you about their lies, is apt to get himself into a lot of trouble. All right, now, I've laid that out for you, and I wanted to draw that connecting link. Don't want you people out there to think I'll preach religion to you, because that's not my purpose and goal. But I cannot divorce this Constitution from Scripture because the guys that wrote this believed in the Scripture. Say, there's your connecting link. The common law comes from the Bible. It's reinstituted. The common law belongs to the people, and the king's statute or the civil law is the king's business. So what we really have then in effect is the good ship Idaho, and the good ship Idaho is in corporate capacity to make money, and you are one of the seamen, one of the crewmen on the ship Idaho. And so, of course, the state has a large financial investment, each and every one of its persons in the state. And they like to protect that. And they need these taxpayers. I mean, a guy comes along and says, hey, why don't you stop paying tax? Don't you see why the state government hates me here? You don't think the state government's going to hate you in Illinois when you start telling the slaves to stop paying the tax to the captain? They're not going to like you at all. Going on then, Federal Reserve notes then are Roman civil law bills of exchange. You see, when a ship goes out on the ocean, you don't carry. You know, these old merchants, they didn't like to carry gold and silver on the ships. Ship sinks in a storm, you lose the gold and silver. So what you do is you put the gold and silver in the Bank of England. Now, the ship sinks. Well, now you've got an insurance carrier named Lloyd's of London who will pay you for the loss. Okay? And you spread that loss among all the rest of the ship owners or the merchants. Now, the gold then is safe on land. The common law only works on land. And the common law only works with gold or silver. So now the monetarists, these international bankers, etc., they say, now how can we take over the land? How can we get control of this wealth that's in the land of the United States? What we need to do is to submerge them in debt, and then we'll give them our debt notes. And so all of us here are using these debt notes of the Federal Reserve banks. We don't have our gold and silver. In the same way that when you go to the bank with your check and deposit it, you give legal title of your property, the check, which represents your labor, you give that to the bank for an equitable interest in the checking account. When you get in on the courtroom floor, you're in an equity jurisdiction because, you see, it's a contractual arrangement between you and the bank. There's no common law rights there. The reason for this merger of common law and equity and this demise of the common law in the United States is that when this swindle took place between 1913 and 1933, nobody said a word. In fact, they all lined up and gave their property away. Today, people line up in the banks and give their checks away. They don't like the income tax. Well, they're mad about that, all right. But they just line right up at the banks and put their checks in there and give up all legal title to their labor. See, that labor is inalienable. Your right to gold and silver is an inalienable right. The state cannot compel you to pay anything but gold or silver. So here's your state then, buying, selling, and trading in counterfeit money. You're buying, selling, and trading in counterfeit money. You're doing so in interstate commerce. You're regulated then by the Commerce Clause at Article 1, Section 8. And so now it's an excise privilege that you're exercising. You see how important this money becomes all of a sudden? We've got this excise privilege to do business like the corporations, like the old Roman merchants, the merchants of Venice and the merchants of England. The old crown, what they call that thing, the tea company that did business in England over in, see if I can remember that, English Tea Company. Did business over in India. They got the monopoly over there. I forgot the name of it. It'll probably come to me here in a minute. But here's this tea company operating, and the king finances it. Can you imagine why these colonists were mad about tea in particular? First of all, they had this tax on tea. It wasn't just the tax on the tea, but rather it was the enslavement, this compelling them to buy this tea, which was from this monopoly company. It was the king's company. So when they were placing a tax on the tea, they were placing a tax on a tax, because the tea company was really the English tea company. It was the monopoly of the state, and it was the Roman civil law. Our founding fathers understood this Roman civil law baloney. Let me show you a little thing here that happens. You ever notice that when I'm going to tie this in now to this tea company. I'm going to show you how this swindle occurs, because it's a little vague when you talk about the tea company and the founding fathers throwing the tea in the harbor. But watch what happened here. Happens every time you have a bond election. Did you ever notice that you never buy and pay for a school in your county? That's right. You never buy and pay for a school. In the old days, when they just had these little one-room schools, which is where I started a school, the farmers or the little group of people in the community, they'd put together, they'd tax themselves voluntarily, go out here and build a one-room school, and they hired the teacher, and they owned the land, or some farmer donated 2 acres of land there it was. Okay? Don't do that anymore. Now, what you do now is you float a bond issue, don't you? Now, what's the bond issue? The bond issue is your voluntary acquiescence into a regulated enterprise or a contractual agreement. The county has your land on the rolls. The county then taxes your land. The county becomes the collection agency to pay the bond off on the school. You know, if you thought about it for a moment, you buy a house for $30,000 and you pay for it over 30 years, and I forgot how these amortize out, but you know, at 8% interest it costs you about $110,000, something on that order. You pay about 4 times as much for it. Well, that's exactly what's happening to you when you have a bond election. You see, Mutual of Omaha or some insurance company, they want to invest money. They want to make money. You don't tax yourself to build the school and own it free and clear. You bond yourself to the insurance company. The insurance company gives the $3 million to the county, which then hires the contractor to build the school. Now the school is owned by who? It's owned by the insurance company. And guess who signed the contract to specific performance? Who's the co-signer? And what is it that you pledged in the event that you default? It's your land. That's what you're pledging. Now watch what's happened here. You see the shaft that the Founding Fathers recognized? Number one, you're going to pay about 4 times as much for the school by financing it this way. And then in addition to that, you're the unwilling co-signer. Of course, most people are probably pretty willing. They go out and vote in these bond elections all the time. You're the unwilling co-signer, in effect, to guarantee that insurance company that you're going to pay that bond, pay that debt back, that mortgage to the insurance company, and if you don't, they'll take your land and give that to the insurance company. So, for that reason, then, this thing of money becomes extremely important. Now watch what happens to the poor guy. He goes into the court now, and he says, I'm not going to pay this property tax because you see this property tax is unconstitutional pursuant to Article 1, Section 10. And I'm going to scream the Fourth Amendment and the Fifth Amendment, and the judge says this entire argument is specious, it's without foundation or merit, therefore we're going to put a lien on your house, and we're going to take your house if you don't pay this property tax. And the patriot leaves the courtroom and he says, my God, I can't believe the injustice. They will not obey the Constitution of the United States at Article 1, Section 10. Friend, there's no constitutional issue in a property tax. Because you have pledged your land. It's on the tax rolls. I don't even care if you own it free and clear. It's on the tax rolls until you take it off. So until you take your land off the tax rolls, claim an interlodium and establish your status as a free man, you're a merchant and trader in equity doing business, and you're being charged an excise tax. What's the excise tax of having the privilege of borrowing the money to build the school that you wanted to send your kids to, so that they can have mush put between their ears, so that they can be told that they live under the laws of the state of Idaho and that they're free men and that they just keep voting. You know, they always tell you, well, if you don't like what the legislature does, just vote them out. How are you going to vote them out? It's ridiculous. They've got the purse strings. They control you. They tell you what you're going to pay them. It's not a voluntary tax. It's tax by distraint. Tax by distraint's constitutional. It's a contract. And where there's a contract, friend, there are no rights issues involved. Now, you see why the courts are ruling against this? I want to turn over here to page, I think it's 124. Got to give you a good sales pitch, I guess, on this coin book. Looking over here at page 124, I'm going to read to you a real controversial statement here concerning this thing of the gold dollar. You know, patriots go in and they claim we're on the gold standard, and that Article 1, Section 10 is the gold standard, and we're going to demand our rights under Article 1, Section 10. I'm not downgrading it, and I'm not saying to you that Article 1, Section 10 doesn't belong in the courts. But it's kind of like a taxpayer, He has a checking account and credit cards, and he's been in the tax system for a long time. He gets tired of it, and so he starts filling out Fifth Amendment returns. That's tax evasion, friends. That's not tax avoidance. Anyway, people think we're on the gold standard. Listen to this. Footnote 368. Thus Congress did not establish a gold dollar or enact a gold standard, as the popular misconception holds. Okay? There's a statement. I'm going to prove this to you. I'm going to show it to you. But I'm just telling you, Congress did not establish a gold dollar. Now you're going to say, yeah, but I've seen little gold dollars, and I saw one made in 1851. My grandmother had it. See? Now, listen now as I read on. There's a popular misconception that holds, and this comes from the Encyclopedia Britannica under the subject matter of dollars, 1963, at page 558. He erroneously reports that the dollar was defined in the Coinage Act of 1792 as either 24.75 grains troy of fine gold or 371.25 grains troy ounces of silver. Your encyclopedia tells you that a dollar is 24.75 grains of gold or 371.25 grains of silver. Erroneously. The Act did no such thing. Now remember what I've told you. Don't believe anything I tell you. But conversely, don't believe anything that the encyclopedia tells you either. Because the authority for law, now, law is the Supreme Court of the United States, not the Encyclopedia Britannica. I don't care what the dictionary says a dollar is. I don't even care what the dictionary says income or wages. I don't care what IRS agents say income, compensation, and wages, tips, commissions, etc. are. The Supreme Court is the only body that counts insofar as law is concerned. Going on, it explicitly defined the dollar as a fixed weight of silver. The Coinage Act of 1792, go read it for yourself. Don't believe me, don't believe this guy. You go read it. And when you see the dollar is fixed in gold at 24.75 grains troy, you'll know I'm lying to you, or I'm stupid. One or the other. But at least you'll know that you know what you see. Because that Coinage Act has some meaning. It has some weight and authority of law behind it. Alright, so the dollar is a fixed weight of silver, and it's regulated the value of gold coins according to this standard unit or money of account. The silver dollar is the money of account, and it's the unit or standard. What is a dollar? A dollar is a unit of measurement. It's like, you go in, hey, I paid for my car last week. Oh, you did? How much did you pay? $371. No, you didn't. You didn't pay $371. You paid some paper that had some aggregate totals of figures and numbers in the corners that meant 371. It's like going in, I paid 371 quarts for my car last week. Quarts. I went in and I paid my mechanic's bill and I gave him 371 inches. I went in and I paid 371 pounds. Pounds of what? Inches of what? What did you give this guy when you paid the 371 or whatever it was? Okay? I'll answer that in a moment. And the market exchange ratio between the two metals. Nowhere did the Act refer to a gold dollar. See that statement? Nowhere in the Coinage Act of 1792 does it refer to the gold dollar. Only to various gold coins of other names that it valued in dollars. Here's a chunk of gold, and we're going to call this chunk of gold an eagle, and this eagle is worth $10. It isn't $10, it's valued at $10. What is $10? $10 is 10 times 371.25 fine grains of silver. A dollar is a unit of measurement like a quart of beer. You got a quart of beer, you got a quart of mayonnaise, you got a quart of pickles. You don't have a quart of dollars. You have a dollar because a dollar is a unit of measurement. A dollar is a unit of measurement of silver. Now, once you've got a dollar and you've got one of those critters here in your hand, you got 371.25 grains of silver, you can say, I have a dollar in my hand. And you could say, no, you just got a little puddle of silver there. Yeah, but that silver weighs 371.25 grains of silver. That is the exact measurement of a dollar. I have the exact dollar. Take a quart of mayonnaise, and it's half full. Do you have a quart of mayonnaise? No, you got a half a quart of mayonnaise. take the mayonnaise out of the jar and pour it on the table. And here's this glob of mayonnaise sitting on the table. How much mayonnaise do you have on the table? You've got a quart of mayonnaise on the table. It doesn't make any difference whether the mayonnaise is in the quart jar or out of the quart jar. Take the quart of mayonnaise and pour it into a gallon bucket. How much mayonnaise is in the gallon bucket? 1 quart. Take a second one and pour it in. Now how much you got? Have you got 2 quarts of mayonnaise in a 1 gallon bucket? Certainly. Okay? Now, let's take 200 grains of silver, and then let's mix it with copper and other elements, and let's stamp it, and we'll call it $1, and we'll put Eisenhower on the front of it, or the Liberty, or we'll call it a Morgan. Do you have $1? No. You've got 200 grains of silver in a coin, and it's not $1, because $1 is 371.25. Same thing. You got a quart of mayonnaise, you take half of it out. You have a quart of mayonnaise, you got a half a quart of mayonnaise. And so your dollar says $1. Just like the jar, it says 1 quart net weight of mayonnaise. But you can look in the jar and you can see it's not there. You see how they used to clip coins and they used to rob people? And this is where this Coinage Act of 1792 came into play. The whole scheme of paper money is designed to steal and rob people. It's always been that way, and it'll always be that way. Anytime there's paper money, there will be theft. Just that simple. You let me be the banker. You just trust me. Remember old Jimmy said, you can trust me. Why don't you trust George? You give me all your gold and silver and let me issue you little bills of exchange. And you watch me rob and steal and take your gold and silver. It's always been this way. And so our founding fathers said, well, it's been this way. We know it's this way. We know paper money collapses, and we want to stop that. We're going to have gold and silver, and we're going to make silver the standard. And this is quoted in a case here. It's called History of Coinage and Currency in the United States and the Perennial Contest for Sound Money. That's a book of 1903 at page 22. Then it comes from the Coinage Act of 1792. Statute 1, page 246. Thus did the Congress apply the Constitution's mandate. It determined as fact the value of a Spanish mill dollar as the same as now current, and thereby permanently fixed the constitutional standard of value or money of account. Friends, the money of account in the United States of America is exactly what the Coinage Act of 1792 carried out as the mandate of Article 1, Section 10 of the Constitution.